Welcome to the Sequential Zohar series. Today we begin the actual Zohar text itself. We are opening Bereshit A, chapter 1, and this chapter is called Making an Engraving upon the Supernal Light. This is where it all starts. This is the Zohar's account of how existence itself came into being. Not just the physical universe, not just the Big Bang, but the metaphysical architecture that preceded everything we can see, touch, or measure. Now, if you've been following the Foundation series, you already have the framework. You know the Sephirot, you know the four worlds, you know the structure. What we are doing now is different. We are walking through the Zohar passage by passage, verse by verse, in order. And the very first thing the Zohar wants to talk about is this moment before creation. Before anything had formed, before there was light or darkness, before there was a before. So let's get into it. I'll walk you through both verses of this chapter, break down the Aramaic terminology, and then we'll talk about why any of this actually matters for your life right now. The passage opens with this line: with the beginning of the manifestation of the king's will, a heart spark made an engraving upon the supernal light. Now, let's slow down and unpack every piece of that, because the Zohar is not wasting a single word here. First, the king's will. The king is a reference to the infinite, to Ein Sof, and the key word is will. This tells us that creation was not an accident. It was not a mechanical process. It was an act of desire. The infinite wanted to create. There was a will, an intention, a ratzon. And this is a huge concept in Kabbalah, because it means that at the very foundation of all reality, there is consciousness. There is purpose. Everything that exists is the product of a deliberate wanting. Now, the beginning of the manifestation doesn't mean this is the beginning of Ein Sof. Ein Sof has no beginning. What it means is that this is the first point at which the will became something that could manifest. It's the threshold between pure infinite potential and the first glimmer of something actualizing. Think of it like this. You can have a thought forming in your mind, but there's a moment where it crosses from a vague feeling into an actual idea. That crossing point, that threshold, is what the Zohar is pointing to here. And notice that it says the king's will, not the king's thought, not the king's word, the will, ratzon. In Kabbalah, will precedes thought. Will precedes wisdom. Will precedes everything. It is the most primal force. Before there was a plan, before there was a blueprint, there was wanting. Desire is the root of all existence. That's not a poetic statement. That's a structural one. Now, the instrument of this first act is what the Zohar calls Botzina de Kardinuta. In English, that's translated as the heart spark, or sometimes the lamp of darkness. And this is one of the most mysterious and powerful images in all of Kabbalistic literature. Let's really look at what this means. A spark implies a sudden, concentrated burst of energy. But this isn't just any spark. It's described as heart, which in Aramaic carries the sense of something dense, concentrated, impenetrable. It's like taking infinite light and compressing it into a single point of absolute intensity. It's not soft, it's not diffuse, it's a focused act of power. And what does this heart spark do? It makes an engraving. That's a very specific word. When you engrave something, you remove material to create a form. You carve into a surface. You take away in order to reveal. So the very first act of creation is not an act of adding. It's an act of removing. The heart spark carved into the supernal light. It created a space, a void, a hollowed out region within the infinite itself. And that void is where our entire universe would eventually come into being. Now, if you know your Lurianic Kabbalah, this is going to sound very familiar. This is essentially the Tzimtzum, the Great Contraction. The Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, built an entire cosmological system around this concept. But here in the Zohar, centuries before Luria, the image is already present. The heart spark engraving upon the supernal light. A removal within the infinite to make room for the finite. And this is a principle that shows up everywhere once you see it. In art, you carve away stone to reveal the sculpture. In music, the silence between notes gives the melody its shape. Even in your own life, sometimes what gets removed is what allows the new thing to emerge. Creation begins with contraction. That's the Zohar's first teaching. Now the passage continues. It says, "This spark emanated from the most concealed of all concealed things, from the secret of the endlessness light." So the origin of this spark is Ein Sof itself, the most hidden, the most unknowable dimension of the divine. No human mind can grasp it. No angel can perceive it. It is beyond all categories, beyond all attributes, beyond even the concept of beyond. And then the Zohar says this spark took a shapeless form and was inserted into the center of a circle that was neither white nor black, nor red, nor green, nor any color at all. Now, this is an extraordinary image. Think about what that means. A circle with no color, not white, which would imply light, not black, which would imply darkness, not any color at all. This is describing a space that exists before the categories of perception even come into being. There is no quality yet, no attribute, no characteristic. It's pure, undifferentiated potential, and the spark is placed at the center of the circle. It's like a seed being planted in soil that doesn't yet have any properties. The seed carries within it everything that will eventually unfold, but the ground it sits in is completely formless. This is the primordial void. This is the womb of creation. The Zohar then says, when it began its measurements, it created colors that shone into the empty space and the engraving. So the spark, once positioned in this void, begins to measure. It begins to differentiate. It begins to create distinctions. And those distinctions are what the Zohar calls colors. Color here is not literal. It's a metaphor for the qualities and attributes that begin to emerge, the Sephirot, the different aspects of divine energy. What was one undifferentiated void now starts to have structure, variation, dimension. And then, from within the heart spark, a fountain spouted, from which the shades down below received their colors. So the spark is not just carving space. It's also the source of a fountain, a flowing emanation from this single concentrated point. Everything flows outward. The colors below, meaning the lower worlds, the worlds of creation, formation, and action, they all receive their qualities from this original fountain. This is a beautiful image. Think of a single spring high up in the mountains. From that one spring, rivers flow down into valleys. Those rivers branch and divide and eventually water entire landscapes. But every drop traces back to that one source. That's what the Zohar is describing. Every quality in our world, every color, every attribute, every nuance of experience, it all flows from this original spark, this original fountain at the center of the primordial void. And notice the language. The shades down below received their colors. The lower worlds don't generate their own qualities. They receive them. They are given their properties by the source above. This is a core Kabbalistic principle. Everything in our world is a reflection, a downstream manifestation of something in the higher worlds. Nothing here originates here. It all comes from above. When you look at the beauty of a sunset, or the complexity of a living cell, or the depth of a human emotion, you are looking at a color that was poured out from that original fountain. It's been stepped down through the worlds, filtered through the Sephirot, but its origin is that single spark at the center of the void. Now the second verse takes us even deeper. It says, "From the most concealed of all concealed things, two faces emanated. One cleaved and the other did not cleave." So from within this hidden source, there's a splitting, a differentiation. One aspect breaks through, it cleaves, it penetrates into manifestation. The other remains hidden. It does not cleave. It stays concealed. This is telling us that even in the very first moment of emanation, there is always a revealed aspect and a concealed aspect. There is always something that comes through into our awareness, and something that remains utterly beyond us. No matter how deep you go, there is always a deeper layer. The Zohar is built on this principle. Every revelation contains a concealment. Every answer opens a new question. And then the passage says, its atmosphere was unknown until forceful blows split attic, and a concealed supernal point shone. Attic Yomin is the most ancient and concealed configuration of the divine, and it took forceful blows to split it open so that a single point could shine through. That point, that tiny concentrated gleam of light, is what the Zohar calls the beginning. And this is the key line. Beyond this point, nothing is knowable, and because of this, it is called by the name beginning, the first of the sayings. In other words, Bereshit, the first word of the Torah, in the beginning, is not describing a moment in time. It's describing this point, this supernal point where knowability itself begins. Below this point, we can investigate, we can study, we can perceive. Above this point, there is only unknowable concealment. So the Torah's very first word is a boundary marker. It says, here is where investigation can begin. Here is where the mind can start to operate. Everything before is sealed, and that should give you real humility when you approach these texts. The Zohar is telling you right at the start, there are limits to what you can know. Even the greatest mystics, even the prophets, could not penetrate beyond this point. What lies above, it is reserved for Ein Sof alone. So why does any of this matter? Why should we care about a heart spark and a colorless circle and a primordial void? Because the Zohar is telling us something about the nature of reality itself. It's telling us that our universe is not a random accident. It was crafted with intention, carved with precision. Every quality we experience, every distinction we perceive, every aspect of our existence was measured out from a single source with deliberate purpose. And it's telling us something about ourselves. The synopsis of this chapter says that just as a seed contains all the stages that will produce a full-grown tree, including the final fruit, the seed of our cosmos contains all the souls of mankind, including our complete and final fulfillment. We were already present in that original spark. Our souls, our purpose, our potential for completion, all of it was encoded at the very beginning. That's not just a nice idea. That has practical implications for how you live your life. If you were already present in the seed of creation, then your spiritual work is not about becoming something you are not. It is about uncovering what you already are. It's about removing the layers, just like that original engraving removed light to create space. You engrave into your own concealment to reveal what was always there. And recognizing this, the Zohar says, accelerates your transformation. When you understand your connection to the source, to the original cause of all causes, you stop floundering and you start moving with purpose. You align with the original intention. You stop asking, "Why am I here?" and you start acting like someone who knows exactly why they are here. Because you were there from the beginning. You were in the spark. That's Bereshit A, chapter 1. The very first passage of the Zohar, and it gives us the seed from which everything else in this entire text will grow. In the next video, we will continue with chapter 2 and see how the Zohar develops this creation narrative even further. If this is serving you, subscribe and share it with someone who's ready for this kind of study. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Shalom.